will know that this is kind of a tie-in with that, because we have there an exhibit called Gone But Not Forgotten. Now when you see the sign that says Gone But Not Forgotten, that refers to the exhibit. It doesn't mean that the exhibit is gone, which has been a misconception by some people. Gone but not forgotten. Well, I missed the exhibit. No, you didn't. You go in and it's still there. So anyway, my name is Anna Rademacher, and I'm not sure why, but I've been asked to welcome you to this event, and I really am glad to see that so many people have come. Ich heiße Anna Rademacher, ich bin aus Owensville und ich habe für mich es ist für mich ein ganz interessant, es ist historische Sache, und deshalb haben wir dieses hier in dieses echt historische Kirche. It's an interest. The history has been a very strong interest, and we're having this in this historical House of God. This is a church that was established in 1881, and if you look at the ceiling, you will see that it has the very, very old traditional stenciling in the ceiling, which you don't see anymore. And there is someone in this group whose ancestor did the ceiling, and I'd like for them to tell us about that. She's outside. Well, I will try to see whether I can get her to come inside later. Anyway, this is done. Jeannie's great-grandfather or something like that has done the ceiling. There's no electricity here. There is the normal heating from 100 years ago is still here. The house is basically as it was when it closed in 1947. The people who own the building have also the community has the cemetery, and we thank the cemetery board for letting us use the building, the church building, and also having this at the site here at the cemetery. We encourage you to sign in when you come in, and there's also there are booklets. Do we have the booklets yet? There are booklets out there, and those did have a cost to them, so if you'd help defray the cost for those booklets, that would certainly be appreciated. After this part of the beginning here, we will have 5 people do portrayals of people in the cemetery. Now, we have, since it's a small cemetery and we have a large group, what we're planning to do is have you go into groups of 10 or 12, so at the end of this part of the program, as you go out, we'll put you in groups and then send you through the cemetery. Herd is not the right word. Put you in groups and guide you through the cemetery. The portrayers we have are Shirley Landwehr, who is doing one of her ancestors, Reverend Richard Brusicki, who is doing Herman Eisenberg, who is a very well-known person of the 19th century in this community. Stacy Asbury is doing Mary Creedy, who had some difficult times in her life. I'll tell you about that. Dennis Warden is doing his great-grandfather, who incidentally was the same age as my grandfather, and they grew up together in the Woolham area. So we sent a few people down here from Woolham. And then the last one is Jane Ellert Wish, who is portraying her great-grandmother, Louisa Ellert, who also went. So these people are from, the earliest was born in 1821, and the latest was born in 1882. So those are the people who are going to be portrayed. Did Jeannie make it back in here? Jeannie, would you tell us about the ceiling?
That's the way it was in the 1800s, late 1800s, and hasn't been touched since then. So it's such a special unique.
Who was your great-grandfather?
Fred Weller. And also great-grandfather of my cousin who's here, Ron Murray. I lost him. Oh, it's his great-grandfather also.
So I'd like to introduce you now to Reverend Bill Haefley, who will have a few words to say.
Thank you. I have to tell you, Jeannie, it's going to be more than a few. Because I couldn't do it any less than that. I want to make an apology to all those that thought they might be coming out here to hear a history of this church. Jeannie made the mistake of telling me that I could do it whichever way I wanted. And so what I wanted to do, and will attempt to do, is to give you some background history. What it'll amount to is a very quick encapsulation of the history of Germany from about the 16th century, very quickly, to lead us up to immigration from Germany to our part of the world here. In the 16th century, that would be the late 1500s, Germany was divided into 7 administrative circles. Those circles were 1, Franconia, 2, Bavaria, 3, Swabia, 4, the Upper Rhine, 5, the Lower Rhine, and that's the one we're especially interested in this part of the world, because Lower Rhine included Westphalia. The majority of the Germans, if I have interpreted and read my history correctly, the majority of the German people who moved into this area were Westphalians. Now that's not to say there wasn't also those from Saxony and other parts, and a goodly number from Bavaria. But Lower Rhine was special. Then there is Lower Saxony and Upper Saxony. These principalities were divided or subdivided into duchies, electorates, counties, and archbishoprics. The English, well, shall I say, writer, historian, Overby once commented that all of Europe was very thankful that Germany was divided in this way, because it made all the rest of Europe safe, because with a united Germany, they would have risen into an imperial power, and instead of being at war most of the time, they would have been at war all the time. The Germans, needless to say, were warring people. Every time any one of you ever say to someone else that I just don't understand, those old German women that I knew way back then were so bossy and so hard and difficult to get along with. Very simple, easy answer. The German women were married to warriors for centuries, and warriors are off at war. And who does that lead to run the farm, the family, the business, whatever it would have been? Women. And because of that, you would have very strong women. That's no accident of history. That's no sociological or psychological or anything else profiling. That's just the way it was. The 30 Years' War was devastating for Germany, and most of the fighting, most of the destruction, most of the rape and the looting and mayhem affected the peasant classes. And the peasant classes suffered greatly. The only 3 Christian groups at the time were Roman Catholic, Lutheran, and Reformed Church. Intolerance of one another in all facets of classes, and especially religious, was widespread. It just didn't get along well with one another. The 30 Years' War ended with the Peace of Westphalia in 1648. And it's been said by many historians, the Peace of Westphalia ended the reign of theology over the European mind and set the groundwork for the age of reason to begin. By the late 1700s and the early 1800s, the German people were a little bit free of war for a little while. The well-to-do class did very well. The classes were the nobles, the clergy, the military officers, which meant army officers, professional people, merchants, and then all the rest were peasants. And the peasant class, of course, far outnumbered all the other classes put together. And the peasants suffered greatly. Constant wars made against the Germanic peoples. It was pretty much set in stone that no one ever married out of their class. In other words, those clergy that could married only daughters or the sons of other clergy people. No women clergy, of course. Military officers only married those within their military family, so forth and so on. With that background, you can see why it's provided the opportunity, provided the impetus for German immigration, especially German immigration into America. Poverty for the peasants, forced conscription, draft if you wish, very much obvious classism, and then general intolerance, especially religious intolerance, lent a great deal of help to the immigration from Germany. The Napoleonic Wars hosted and hastened such immigration around the 1820s, and it was at about 1820 that approximately 8,000 Germans immigrated to America, and a large number of those to Missouri. In 1824, one Gottfried Duden bought a farm in today's Warren County, and he published a book after returning to Germany talking about the easy American life. You see that Herr Duden, when he lived in Warrenton, we had 3 fairly nice winters. Global warming, I guess. Whatever the case, after the 3 relatively easy winters, he went back to Germany and wrote a book about how America was such a lovely country. It was so easy to raise crops. Just cast out the seeds and everything took care of itself. Never had to worry about the cold in the winters and all that. Well, many people bought that book and bought into the theory and came to this country, and then wouldn't you know it, typical Missouri winters, and much suffering, and many of them died. Starvation and other health issues. The Germans came to the United States between 1840 and 1847. 889,000 reached America. By 1860, there were 88,487 German-born people living in Missouri. And Missouri Methodism was ready for them. The Gasconade Circuit began in 1820. By 1836, the Gasconade Circuit had 135 white members and 32, quote, colored, unquote. The Gasconade Circuit had a colored pastor who no doubt was a local pastor, or it was called then exhorter, with his German background, who so opposed slavery, because I said something, remember, about involuntary conscription. The overwhelming number of German immigrants supported President Lincoln during the war years and supported the cause of the Civil War to set men free. They were so opposed to slavery because of what had happened to them in their many years past. The German leader, as far as Missouri is concerned, was one medical doctor, Ludwig Jacobi, and his book was read and his understandings were passed on to a man named William Nast, And with that sort of leadership, the old Union Circuit, which was part of the Herman Mission, founded and formed the Red Oak Church in 1850. Now, this is kind of interesting to me as a United Methodist, and I don't know whether it'll be interesting to any of you, but it says something that we need to hear. The first member, according to the archives of the Gasconade County Republican, was written by H.8 Winter sometime later. The first member here in the Gasconade County charge point of Red Oak was one George Troster. Later on, in January of 1858, a husband and wife, Xavier Sauer and Frederica née Kraus Sauer, joined on probation into not this church building, because there's some discussion about this being a later dated church. I won't get into that history because I don't have the archives to prove it. There's no use upsetting a lot of people about which came first and where, because I don't know. But they came on January the 1st of 1858 and offered themselves for membership. They were received into full connection membership after being on probation on April, I said 58, I should have said 48, April the 15th of 1852. You hear what I'm saying? Almost 3.5 years to prove themselves ready for membership into the church. I wonder how many Christians we'd have coming to churches today if everyone had to stand almost a 4-year probationary period. Could it be that our foremothers and forefathers felt that one must prove themselves for acceptance under the Lord before they come in?
Mm-hmm.
I wonder how many clergy in here might say, now, maybe it would be better if we spent a little time preparing them instead of taking them in on the front door and letting them out the back door. Do you hear what I'm saying?
Uh-huh.
That was not the way the German people did it. And that wasn't the way the Methodist Church did it back then. And I won't talk any further about that. The one discussion that we will continue to have, and I hope some historian proves this for certain, probably the first site of the church was not here. It probably was over north of the Red Oak Creek, and then the church moved here at a later date and settled in. That's probably. I'm not saying that's a certain. I'm saying that's a probable. Probably lived pretty much someplace just a little bit north of the Ellert Farm. Probably. I don't want to be found guilty of trying to do some Reconstructionist history. I thank you for the opportunity. I want you to try to understand that what I've said is a historian only. Cause and effect. Why were these people here? Why did they come? And why were they so tough? Why were they so resilient? Why were they so able to make a go of it? It's because their life had been just so, if you will, awful in the old country. I want you to think about that today as you hear these stories. And now the Reverend Dr. Libby Brizicki will present the commendation to go on to the service.
We're gathered here today to hear voices from the grave, voices from the cemetery. And if this were a funeral back when in history, first of all, I wouldn't be here because I'm a woman. And even the Methodists didn't have women right away. But I do have a hat on because you would not have been in church without your hat and gloves. But we would have been here supporting one another with our prayers because of the death of one of our family members. And probably it would have been the death of a child. because children died at such a terrible rate in those early days. And most assuredly, we would have gathered together with the family prayer. Now, we might have not stumbled where we will all stumble today when I ask you to join me in a few minutes about sins or trespasses or debts. But we might well have stumbled with Vater unser or unser Vater, because there was a great theological turmoil which way the Lord's Prayer began. But it is our family prayer, and for this brief service before we get herded outside, I would like to invite you to stand and join in our family prayer and listen to the prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Holy God, by your mighty power, you give us life, and in your love you have given us new life in Jesus Christ. We now entrust this family member to your merciful care. We do this in the faith of Jesus Christ, who died and rose again to save us and is now alive and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit in glory forever. God, now let your servant depart in peace. Your word has been fulfilled. Our eyes have seen the salvation which you have prepared in the sight of every people, a light to reveal you to the nations and the glory of your people Israel. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May God's face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May God look upon you with kindness and grant you peace. Amen.
Creedy, and I was born on a boat in 1853 coming from Germany. In 1875, I met my wonderful husband. His name was William, and we married. We had a large farm over off of Red Oak Creek, and it was sat high on the hill. It was a big white house, and it overlooked our farm. It was 2 stories tall, and it was a beautiful home, and in the winter I quilted, and I also made homemade items. I had 2 daughters, Anna and Clara. When Anna was 21 years old, she wanted to go to St. Louis. It was so far away at that time. And she went to St. Louis, and she worked, and she got her education there, and she was stoking a furnace with wood in an apartment building that she lived in. Her clothes caught fire, and she ran up 4 flights of stairs, but she was burned and she died. And William and I never quite got over that. That was in 1903. Anna was 26 years old. Right after that, William took sick. And William died in 1911. In 1918, my youngest daughter, Clara, met Raymond Rice. His name was Raymond Martin Rice. And they had a child named Raymond Martin. And he was born in 1918. And then in 1924, they had another child named Mildred Rice Branson. In 1929, we were in our home, the large white home overlooking our farm, when my granddaughter ran to me and said, "Grandma, there's a boogeyman upstairs." Well, it wasn't. What it was a fire. And the fire took our home. Everyone got out all right because my daughter was next door and she was helping birth a child. So it was just my granddaughter and I, and we got out. But shortly after that, in 1929, the Depression hit. Since our farm had burnt down, my son-in-law, he built a shack across the creek, and that's where we lived. And we could remember our children going to bed hungry sometimes, just eating nuts and things, because at that time it was so horrible with the Depression. In 1935, the Lord took me and I died. And I wonder if history doesn't repeat itself, because Mildred then lost her home to a fire. My grandson, Norvin Rice, lost his 6-year-old as she was hit by a truck as she was going to her school bus. My granddaughter, Naomi Kane, also lost her 16-year-old to a drunk driver. So I do feel the tragedy does run in the family. But thank you for listening to my story.
Thank you. Thank you.
Informing. Telling the story. There it is. Got it.
And I was born in 1838 in Germany. I came over when I was a young child to America with my parents. And we had a home down close to Walbert. You all know where the Blue House Road is, Bikini Field or Barn Holler. I used to hear those places now. Joyce knows up now. And, well, when I was about 25, I married Mr. Borgstadt, Herman Henry Borgstadt. And it was in 1864, actually, and it was during the time of the Civil War, and we had one baby and one on the way. And Sterling Price's armies were coming through, headed towards Jefferson City, and there were a lot of bushwhackers around. So one night, there was a man rode up on a horse, and somebody knocked at the door. And of course, Herman got up to see who it was, and a shot rang out, and he lay dead on the floor. Now, what was I to do? 2 babies, one little one and one on the way. So, God works in mysterious ways. Lo and behold, Wilhelm Ehlert happened to be a neighbor. He had been widowed with 3 children. So he and I were married in 1865. And to these children from our first marriage, we added 10 more of our own, including a pair of twin girls. Things were going along pretty good. We had a hard life, but it was good. We had lots of kids, not much money, you know, but we all loved each other, and the big kids helped raise the little kids. And we had good neighbors. We'd get together for fun and for work. Sometimes they would come over and help cut wood in the fall, and butchering was always a big day. They'd start early and get the fire going, you know, and have that big pot out there, and we'd have a steer or a hog to butcher, and we always had chickens, so the kids would gather the eggs, and, you know, if we didn't have a lot else to eat, we could have fried eggs, scrambled eggs for breakfast. Sometimes the kids would take boiled eggs for lunch to school. And, well, the kids would take, if they had to go to church or to town, they'd ride their horses. And Wilhelm and I would bring the little ones in the wagon, you know, and kids liked to play with the neighbors, just like now. But they'd play hide and seek and tag, and in the summertime they'd go swimming in the creek. We'd go seine some minnows or dig worms and grasshoppers, catch grasshoppers for bait. We'd find some crawdads. Sometimes we'd fry them with the fish, you know, and frog legs. You know, frog legs were always good. We had ducks and geese would sometimes land on the creek or on the pond, and we'd fix them. In the summertime, we canned. Of course, we had to do everything on the wood stove. We had, when the thrashing crew would come through, we'd have to fix big meals because you had all those guys helping besides all those kids, you know. So you'd have to start early in the morning and bring the chickens' necks and pluck them and get them all ready to fry, and send the kids down to the cellar for some of those potatoes that weren't quite rotten yet, you know, and get that old canned stuff, that really beautiful stuff that we had put up in the summertime, and put some of that out. And of course, we still had the fresh things from the garden too when we were thrashing. Now when we were butchering, it was a little bit different. And all the crops in the garden and everything depended on the weather and whether the creek got up or whether it was a drought, so some years were better than others. Along about 1885, Wilhelm passed away. And there I was. Some of the kids, of course, were grown, but some of them were still at home, and it was very hard, but we all stuck together. And by the time, about 1916 or so, I moved with my youngest son, John, and his family. They lived right across the creek over here. You can almost see the house. John and Fanny had 4 kids, and so I lived with them my last 10 years. And the last 4 years, I was an invalid. I had fell and broke my hip, and they couldn't set the bones, of course, and so the doctor just gave me morphine. And after a while, he said, "Louisa, you can't take any more morphine. That's all you get." So I just put it up on the shelf and said, "That's it then, no more." So it was very hard and very painful, and the kids thought I was crabby, but when you don't feel good, it's not easy. Then in about 1918, was during the World War I had to go by train to St. Louis to register as an alien female because I was not an American citizen. So I had to carry this card with me under threat of arrest. It had my picture, and since I couldn't read and write, I had to make an X for my mark. But I had to carry this all the time. It was like, now you might say like a green card, like a non-American would carry. But this was very hard in those days because of my hip. And then in 1926, on March the 14th, I went home to be with my Maker, with all 10 of my kids around, keeping close tabs and being with us in the last moment. So, as we come together today, I just want all of you to remember that we each have a story. And I think it's important just for each one of us to remember the stories you hear today, and tell your kids your stories. Tell your grandkids your stories. It's very important. Thank you for coming.
My name is Henrietta Eisenberg Steffen. I was born in Leppi-Detmold, Germany in the year 1820. I married John Friedrich Steffen after his first wife, who was my older sister, died. They were parents of 3 daughters, Henrietta, Mary, and Minnie. Our son Fritz was also born in Germany. Conditions there were really bad in the mid-1800s, and many people had migrated to the West to seek better conditions for themselves and their families. We left Germany on a 3-mast sailboat in the year 1853. Our journey was long and perilous. Storms tossed us about, and we wondered if the old boat would give way, but we made it, and other days it was really pretty calm. We reached the mouth of the Mississippi River by way of Key West, Florida. It took us 9 weeks. There we took a steamboat. Actually, the steamboat was towed up the river towards New Orleans, but shortly before reaching New Orleans, the old boat gave way and we lost all our possessions we had brought with us to start housekeeping in the new world. But fortunately, no lives were lost. We then went on up to St. Louis, except for my brother, Herman Eisenberg, who is also here today. He stayed in New Orleans and got a job digging ditches. Meanwhile, in St. Louis, my husband, John Frederick, got a land grant for 313 acres, paying 12.5 cents per acre. This grant was signed by President James Buchanan.
It was called Bitland because it was bought sight unseen. He gave the government officials an extra $10 to pick out a suitable location. But I'm sure that the government officials knew no more about where this land was located than we did. We then went on up the river, the Missouri River, to Washington, where we were met by some acquaintances from Germany who had migrated here several years before. Their names were brokers. The three girls stayed in Clover Bottom, because that's where the brokers lived. They had immigrated there, and they married, and then Fritz went west as a young man, and he was never heard from again. Meanwhile, we set out to find the land we had bought sight unseen, and it was like finding a needle in a haystack. But by looking at government plats and some records of the county seat, we were able to locate it in Gasconade County at the headwaters of two creeks, one that drained into the Reddo and the other at the Burbus, near Teeth. We kept the larger tract which drained into the Reddo as our homestead. There my husband built a one-room log home, which was later used as a smokehouse when he built a larger two-room home. That is where our children were born. There were 6 of them. We also later sold the acreage that drained over to the Burbus River to my brother Herman Eisenberg and his wife Louisa. They made that their homestead. And we also sold some acreage to Henry Remmert, who was a wagon master from the old country, and also to a Herman Shapercutter, who was a blacksmith. My husband was the first in the neighborhood to own a wagon and a pair of horses, or a team of horses, I should say, and was considered a well-to-do farmer. He would loan this team of horses and wagons to anyone that needed to use it. We then got together and joined the Methodist Church, which was first north of the Reddo and was later moved here where it stands today. My husband died on October the 9th, 1884, and is buried here in the church cemetery along with our young daughter, who was only 5.5 years old. Her name was Emma. I am also buried here in the church cemetery. My date of death is unknown. Thank you for coming to hear my story.
I think we're ready to begin. This is the whole group. Mein Name ist Eisenberg, Hermann Eisenberg. My name is Eisenberg, Hermann Eisenberg. I was raised in Germany in what was in the 19th century the Duchy of Lippe-Detmold. We heard from Pastor Hafley in the church about how there were all of these literally dozens of German states, and truth be told, Prussia, the largest and most militaristic of those states, was in the process of gobbling up these other little duchies and principalities one way or another, sometimes through war, sometimes through marriage, sometimes through shady financial dealings. And Lippe-Detmold was one of those little duchies that remained sort of independent, but not really. It was a vassal of the larger state of Prussia, and often people on official papers would have put down that they are from Prussia, even though really they were from Lippe-Detmold. Maybe not the people themselves, but the officials, the government officials, who would have given people the exit papers so that they could come to America. Well, I was born in 1829, and I came to America in 1853. How old was I in 1853 if I was born in 1829? Some of you guys who are still in school, you could figure that one out. These old folks can't, but 1829 is the date of my birth, the year of my birth, and the year is 1853 when I came to America.
24.
24 years old. I was a young man, single. You know why many young men, single, in that age 20 to 25 years, came to America at that time, the 1850s, the 1860s, the 1870s, or even the 1880s from Germany?
To escape the service.
Draft dodgers. Draft dodgers. Let's say it. Let's not pretend otherwise. They didn't want to serve in the Prussian army. Okay? Take my hat off, and I'm Richard Brieseke. My father's father, my paternal grandfather, came in 1881 and settled down at Elmont for a few months before going to St. Louis. That's down near Sullivan. Age 20, to avoid conscription in the Prussian army. He had two brothers who had come over earlier for the very same reason. One in 1864, one in 1873, and he came in 1881. And all three of those brothers were draft dodgers. If you have any relatives, any ancestors who came over as single young men, 20 to 25 years of age, in the 19th century from Germany, if I were a betting man, I would bet that was also applicable to them. Well, I came over. I'm Herman Eisenberg now. I came over on a boat from Bremerhaven in North Germany to New Orleans. 9 weeks. 3-masted sailing ship. People who had money came in cabins which were above the waterline. People like me, peasants that we heard about in the church, we came over in steerage. Do you know what that is? Below the waterline, where the animals otherwise would have been. Hence the name steerage, steers. Okay, there weren't livestock on the boat when we came over, but there were people, but living in the home as livestock otherwise would have lived. It was a dreadful journey, 9 weeks from Bremerhaven to New Orleans. People were sick, often children would die, other people would die as well. Well, we came over from Lippet-Detmold, members of my family, my sister Henrietta, who you've already met, and friends, neighbors over there. And we came over with a friend who was a little more well off than the rest of us, a man by the name of Stephens, who had some money so that when we got to New Orleans and we came up the river to St. Louis, even though he was by that time running short on cash, he could come out to this area in Gasconade County and buy a rather large tract of ground for members of his family and his friends. And eventually, quite a number of people came from Lippet-Detmold to this particular area. And indeed, you see all the old tombstones here. Probably the majority of those tombstones represent people who were actually born in Lippet-Detmold. You know, the grapevine told how important and advantageous this part of the world would be. I came over single, but within 2 years I had married Mr. Stephens' daughter, Louisa, and that was 1855, and we were eventually to have 7 children. I was a strong man, but one of my sons was even stronger than I was, and he was known later on as the strongest man in Gasconade County. That son, Frederick was his name. He was well educated for the time. He went to Central Wesleyan College in Warrenton, the German Methodist College. He went to the normal school at Cape Girardeau, Teachers College, and he eventually himself set up a Teachers College in Owensville to establish the opportunity for people to teach in the rural schools in this area.
My name is Fred Herman Kepke. I'm the youngest one that you're going to hear talk here today. In fact, I'm the only one that was born in the United States. So I'm going to start out a little bit about my parents. My parents' names were Wilhelm and Augusta Borlish Kepke. They immigrated from Prussia in 1869. For the younger ones here, that would be, you just noticed that is Germany. Anyhow, they took a boat, of course, from Germany to New York in 1869. The trip took 53 days. During that trip, their third child was born. That wasn't me, though. I was the 9th of 12 children that they had. It took them a couple of years, but in 1872, they settled in a place called Woolham, Missouri. For those of you who are not from around here, that's just a couple of miles west of Owensville. In 1882, I was born. I grew up on the farm there with my dad and mom. Dad farmed the farm, of course, and he also repaired and made shoes for people for extra money. But anyhow, we were in association. We went to the church there at the Woolham Methodist Church. Now, there's a lot of churches in this area, and they're all connected together. You have this one here, the Red Oak Methodist Church, and then there's the Rosebud Methodist Church, then the Owensville Methodist Church, and the Woolham Methodist Church. And through that association, I met my first wife, Lily Weller. We were married in February 19th of 1908. We purchased a small farm just over the ridge over here, just a couple of miles from here. Her family, in fact, you may have heard it said earlier on the inside, her father, Fred Weller, is the one who stenciled the ceiling in the church. Lily and I had 4 kids. Their names were Edgar, Harold, Lydia, and Victor. And things were going along pretty good. But then in 1918, something came along. Lily was pregnant with our 5th child, and the flu. She caught the flu. And that flu took her away from us. That was, she died November 18th of 1918. Now that flu didn't just affect my family, it affected the whole world and the United States. We were at war at that time. It was called the Great War. For you younger ones, you'd know that is World War I. But during the Great War, 40,000 American soldiers died from that flu. Only 83,000 American soldiers died during the war. So almost half of them died from the flu. In the United States, 675,000 Americans died from that flu. They call it, you're learning about it in school, I'll bet they call it a pandemic. That was the last pandemic. Now, anyhow, that put me in a bad situation. I was a young man. I had 4 children under the age of 10. So it was a hard winter for me, too. But through the good association of my church, I met my second wife, Anna. Anna Bushman was introduced to me by our preacher. She was from Owensville. Anna and I purchased another farm then to move to just over the ridge, on just a little bit more this way. On that farm, right now, Mr. Mark Ellert owns that farm. But anyhow, we had a couple of children by the name of Bud and Elaine on that farm. And things were going along smooth again, but you know, there's always bumps in the road of life. And the Depression came along. And I had an argument with the bank. They said I didn't get the payment there on time. I had the money, but they said I didn't get it to them on time, and they repossessed my farm. I was, as you can imagine, very upset. We had to move back to the original farm, or my first farm. We still had that. The problem was the house was kind of small for 6 kids and 2 adults, so we built another home there. And we lived there happily until 1943 when I sold that farm to my firstborn son, Edgar, and his wife, Alice Myrtle. They had already had 2 kids at that time by the name of Lee and Imogene. Anna and I then were retiring, and we moved back to moved to Owensville at that time. We lived in a small white house on North Main Street. In case you all from Owensville, that right now New York Life Insurance sits there at that location. I had a little shed in the back of my house where I did some woodworking. I made things like this rabbit trap or this stool, a shadow box, and I also sharpened lawnmowers for people, things like that to make time go by a little faster. In 1969, though, the next major event in my life, Anna and I celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary, which was, if you think about it, that Anna was my second wife, and I'd already been married to my first wife for almost 10 years before she passed away. We celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary at the old Moose Lodge, and all of our children were able to attend. 10 of our 15 grandchildren, and all 10 of our great-grandchildren were there. As time went on and as I grew older, Anna and I were fairly healthy, but I did have problems with arthritis. So I sat around a lot in the easy chair in the living room, and when I wanted something, I'd ring this bell so they could get me a glass of water or something to eat or help me up, things like that. I remember playing checkers with my grandchildren in that house. But one of my fondest memories was the day I passed away on October 24th in 1971, because I can't think of a better way, because you see, I died in that house with my children at my bedside. All of them except Elaine. Elaine had passed away earlier. Anna lived a couple more years. She died in January 24th of 1973. I had died in October 24th of 1971. Thank you.